Hi everyone, Don Peterson coming to you from the Swing Factory. Thanks again for coming back, and we're going to have another lesson from the library. Today's book that I chose is Swing Like a Pro, and this book is by Dr. Ralph Mann and Fred Griffin. Dr. Ralph Mann I met down at the golf show years and years ago, and he was starting to compile data or information about golf swings that he was going to use, I guess, to write this book, or at least to formulate a model. So what they did was, it says right here, this is a composite of over 100 of the world's top golfers. So I know that he was videotaping and analyzing and asking questions and doing what a scientist does to find everything about those golf professionals, and most of them were PGA Touring professionals, everything about them that he could find out to put in the model. And I know that they used only the things that they had in common. So that's kind of what this book was written about, was the model of golf swing based on a computer composite of the tour's best swingers or players in the game. So one fact that I will give you is that I learned from someone else. I'm not sure whether it was Dr. Ralph Mann or not, so I won't give him credit for this, but when you compile data like this and you have imperfect subject matter, so none of these golf professionals that they did you might consider had a perfect golf swing. They were all quite different, I'm sure. And if you look at Lee Trevino or Jack Nicklaus or Arnold Palmer, or some of the subjects he might have used back when they first did this book and everything, and his modeling weren't perfect golf swings. So you'd have to say that all of that data was what they call dirty data. So it's a bunch of imperfect subject matter, but they used that to form the model swing. So the model swing is not a perfect swing, but it's a model that we can go by. So let's dig into this book right now, and let's take a look at what they found from this model composite of the best players on the tour that could help you with your golf game. So early on in the book, they talked about the grip. So let's talk about what they found. And one of the things that they mentioned was that the grip, as we taught it probably years ago, was the neutral grip was a little bit more palms parallel, obviously, but maybe the right palm was facing the target and the back of your left hand was facing the target. So that would have put your hands more of a straight up, neutral, what they thought was a neutral position. They found that when they put the composite together for the model golfer, that it was actually quite a bit stronger than that. So the hands were both turned to the right, and we're talking about right-handed golfers would have been turned to the right. Obviously, a left-handed golfer would be turned more to the left. So having your hands in a stronger position was actually a neutral position for the pros, because obviously this was a composite, so there might have been some pros that were strong and some pros that were weak. And I'm sure that's true for today's pros as well. But back then, I would imagine someone like Freddie Couples was strong. Let's see, Paul Azinger was strong, Bernard Langer was strong, and maybe someone like Johnny Miller and Jack Nicklaus were a little bit on the weaker side. So, but the composite was that the neutral grip would have been more on the strong side of what we would normally have considered strong, neutral, and weak in the old days. And just for my 2 cents, that correlates with what I teach too, because I hardly ever teach someone what would be considered a neutral grip, which is actually straight up and down. I actually have always considered that weak. I've never had anybody to the left of neutral. Straight down the center of the shaft with your left thumb and having your left palm back to the back of the hand facing the target. Right palm facing the target is what I consider a weak grip. Strong would be right palm more up and neutral somewhere in between. So keep that in mind when you're working on your golf game. I would favor a stronger grip, nothing too straight up and down. One of my favorite parts in the book is where they talked about obviously the grip, but also that you can't manipulate the club face. One of the great myths in golf, it says, is that you can manipulate the club face with your hands and forearms to the positions you desire during the stages of the downswing. And then they quoted Ben Hogan here. It says, "We wholeheartedly agree with Ben Hogan, who stated, 'Consciously trying to control the face of the club and impact is folly. You cannot time such a delicate and devilish thing. It happens too fast, much too fast, Hogan believed. And this is something that I've always taught as well. When I hit a good golf shot, I don't feel my hands trying to manipulate. Now, when you're swinging poorly, I've had shots where I tried to manipulate the club face, knowing that it was too open as I was coming into impact, so I was trying to get my hands to help. Or if it was too close coming to impact, I'd try to hold off. But actually trying to do that, you're going to hit it all over the joint. So don't try to manipulate. And this, I often talk to people about this because, you know, I've seen Sean Foley and Tiger Woods working on impact position where they're trying to control the face through impact. You consciously see him doing this or doing this with his hands. And, you know, for maybe someone like Tiger Woods, he might be able to accomplish something like that. So I'm not going to say that he can't. But Hogan and in this book, Swinging Like a Pro, Dr. Ralph Mann and Fred Griffin, they thought that it was probably quite impossible. Partially because the club weighs so much at impact. It weighs something like 120 pounds at impact is, by scientific terms. So that would be hard for you to manipulate with the small muscles of your hands or wrists. Plus the fact that it's moving 100 miles an hour or 80 or whatever it's moving, depending on which club you're swinging. And having to have it perfectly the right squareness at impact for your swing path to hit a desirable shot is probably quite difficult, as you can imagine. The next thing that we're going to talk about in here is about spine angle or spine tilt. And you know, there's lots of controversy, I guess, from today's teaching methods with what this found years ago when they did their research, was that, you know, a more ideal position would be to have your spine tilted so that your hips were forward of your head in the address position. And they found that that would enable the hips to get out a little bit earlier, which is kind of what I teach in my philosophy as well. But it's easier for you to get your hips out in front and get your weight to your lead side before you get to impact, which is one of the key things in transition. So setting up with your spine tilted a little bit to the right for golfers who are right-handed golfers, and then to the left for left-handed golfers, they found to be quite beneficial, again, because it helped get the hips in the right position leading into impact. So I thought that was pretty important. I find the same thing. In fact, I did a video that I talk about a bar of soap, so you might want to look that video up. It's how the hips react like a bar of soap, and that's one of my videos on my YouTube channel. Now, for those of you who've read my Jack Nicklaus Golf My Way review or listened to it, another commonality here that's echoed in this book is, you know, kind of a squatting feeling in the backswing, where most of the pros kept their trail knee flexed, and they felt like the trail hip went backwards a little bit during the backswing, and then a lot of the weight went around and more towards the heel. So that's, again, very similar to what Nicklaus was talking about, and using the legs for power. So if you want to swing with the power and using the ground and your legs, you might want to consider that. There's a lot of instruction now where they're talking about straightening the right leg. The hip can go backwards, but that's going to straighten the right leg with a lot of teachers. And to me, that's putting you in a position where you can't use your leg as much. Might get you a deeper backswing, but I think there's a fine line there that you might want to tinker around with. I like trying to keep the trail knee flex and having that squatting feeling. I think it's a really good thing for good golf. Another point that they brought out in the book was how the downswing motion in golf is very similar to throwing. And this goes back to my book, Baseball Golf, where I talked about the throwing motion. Mike Adams was big on teaching how, you know, a lot of athletic motion is step and throw, and you look at high lie, and you look at tennis, and you look at baseball and pitching and even hitting to some degree. All these different motions are very similar. So there's the opening of the hips, I guess, when you're throwing, and the elbow leading the hand and the club. So the trail elbow being in front. And they talked about also the trail elbow dropping below the lead elbow on the downswing. So I think that's all stuff that, you know, we talk about in my lessons every day. I'm teaching people. So these are things that you have to work into your golf swing. If you don't have these, then those are the things you want to start working on. You need to learn to use the ground, open your hips, and tuck that trail elbow, and develop power the same way that the pros do. Along the lines of the hips opening and having the downswing in golf be like a throwing motion, they also wanted to make sure that you understood that it's not set up. Impact is completely different. Position, the body's turned completely differently than the way you set up. So there's some instruction in golf where people talk about, oh, you set up like you want to be at impact, but that's not really true. You set up in a position that allows you to get to a really good impact position, but the setup is not mirroring impact. Impact, you're open, your body's further forward, you're on your lead side, your right elbow and right shoulder are much lower, so there's a lot of differences there that you have to consider. And lastly, one of the things that I thought was along the lines of the same things that I teach was in the model swing, the trail heel was off of the ground at impact. So again, this is a composite of a lot of different players. I imagine there's a few players in here that had the heel almost on the ground at impact, but there were maybe some players like a Johnny Miller or someone who had the heel way far off the ground. And same thing would be true today. You look at Bubba Watson, his heel's way off of the ground. There's people who are jumping as they go through the golf ball. So a lot of different ways of using your hips and your lower body, but also different ways of getting power in your golf swing. But having your trail heel come off of the ground, I think, is key, because I want to see that the weight has moved onto your lead side. I like the idea of stepping and planting and getting a firm grip on the ground, so to speak, so that you can release your upper body and release that club with a lot of power and a lot of accuracy. Okay, so that concludes my review of Swing Like a Pro. One of the things I'd like to offer up, maybe for consideration, thinking about old technology or old teaching philosophies and everything versus modern day. Back when this was written, it was written by a scientist. So it's like these guys were smart back then and they knew their stuff, but it was also based on opinions that they formulated. So now you fast forward and it's 2020 and we have lots of scientists out there that are studying the golf swing, and we've got lots of golf pros who enlist scientists to help them study the golf swing. And then there's fights on social media all the time about whose scientist is right. So if you look back at an old book like this, you could say, oh, I'm going to disregard all that because that's old science. Well, there's new science now and they're still disagreeing. So maybe these guys were right, and maybe there's some information in every book that you might read. So let's take a look at everything, and then you formulate your own opinions, because there's plenty out there to go around. Oh, hey, you looking for a game? Come on, you can join us. Don't forget, like, subscribe, and ring that bell, and we'll notify you next time we come out for a game.